Welcome back to the podcast. I am continuing my bunch of shows on TwoMorrows Publications and their books and magazines. I'm very happy to bring on the editor of my favorite magazine from TwoMorrows, Back Issue, Roger Ash. Roger, as a first-time guest, I always ask the same question. Tell me your origin story. How'd you get into comic books and become a lifelong fan?
When I was growing up, all the convenience stores, grocery stores, whatever, all had spinner racks. And I always looked at them, but I never really picked anything up. I remember getting things like Tom and Jerry comics and Disney digests and stuff like that from my parents when we'd go on long road trips. There was always that interest there, but I never really got into it until one day I was at a local department store and I saw an issue of Marvel's Laugh Olympics comics. And that was a Saturday morning TV show I really enjoyed. And I'm like, oh, hey, here's more stories. So I grabbed that and I also picked up at the same time Howard the Duck number 25, which was the first part of the Ringmaster story. And between those two, I always credit Howard a little bit more, but between those two, those kind of hooked me. And I think Howard intrigued me because I grew up with Donald Duck and Daffy Duck and all these other cartoon characters. So seeing a non human character in the Marvel comic really appealed to me. So that's why I went for that. Little did I know what I was in for, as it was quite a bit different than I was expecting, but I loved it. And my collecting grew from there. I was friends with a few people who also collected comics. I grew up very much a dyed in the wool Marvel zombie. I wouldn't even look at DC. I was reading all the stuff on the like Stan soapbox or things like that where it's like, nope, make mine Marvel. That's who I am. That's what I'm all about. And I had friends who were big Marvel fans and we ended up and I had a friend who was a big DC fan who always tried to get me to read DC stuff, but I just ended up branching out and reading stuff like Amazing Spider-Man, Doctor Strange. I popped in on Walter Simonson's Thor because I had enjoyed his stuff in Battlestar Galactica, of all things. And then I distinctly remember one day being at the grocery store with my mom, and on the spinner rack there was New Teen Titans number 1. And I knew both Wolfman and Perez from their work at Marvel. And I decided to give it a try. And that was my entry into DC. And my friend who liked DC stuff got me to read some different DC things. I think he had me read the Joker's Five-Way Revenge, which is one of my favorite Joker stories, the classic by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. May have thrown some Englehart and Rogers stuff in there as well. He also got me hooked on Legion and had loaned me all of the Great Darkness saga. And I read that and enjoyed it, but I had no idea who Darkseid was. So that big reveal was lost on me. And then I just branched out from there.
Did you always think you would be working in the comic book industry? Because I know you worked at Westfield Comics for a long time too. What was that like?
At some point, I decided I wanted to be a writer, and I kind of geared myself towards hopefully becoming a writer, which didn't quite happen the way I had intended it to, but that was okay. But I was one of the original subscribers to Westfield when it started, and I grew up in it started in Madison, Wisconsin, and I grew up in a town about a 45-minute drive away. And that was at the time the closest comic shop. So being able to order my comics through the mail made things a lot easier. Although I still rode my bike around to various stores to look at things. But then when I graduated college, jumping time, when I graduated college, I inquired about getting a job at Westfield, and even though I didn't get one right away, I eventually did. I started at the bottom. This was way before the internet, so I was doing data entry on the orders that we had mailed in, and I started doing some work on the Westfield newsletter with Casey Carlson, who I had vaguely known because he and my brother went to school together. So I was aware of him, even though I didn't know him real well. But it was at Westfield that I got to know him, and I started writing some stuff for the newsletter there. And, things changed a little bit. Casey left to, I don't remember what he did the first time. It may have been when he went up to Krause Publications to be the original editor on Comic Book Retailer or Comic Retailer. And a lady named Joyce Greenholt took over, and I became her assistant. Casey came back. Casey went away again, this time to be an editor at DC. Joyce left to do something at Krause. I don't remember exactly what. And so I took over on our catalog and eventually doing stuff on our website. And it was during that time that I started doing interviews, which I found I really enjoyed a lot. And just developed my working style and stuff there. And also through Westfield, I met Mark Nathan, who runs the Baltimore Comic-Con, and became involved with that for a number of years. But working at Westfield was interesting. If anyone has ever worked in comics retail, it's not an easy thing to do. And I was there through all the distributors going away except for Diamond, and then things changing again a few years ago. This is going to sound corny, but it's not a business for the faint-hearted. Comics retail is very difficult, and I learned a lot there. I made a lot of friends in the comics industry through that. But yeah, it was a good job. I'm glad I did it, but when I ended up leaving, it was time for me to go, I think.
So how long have you been working at TwoMorrows, and what got you started there and all that? And what's it like working with TwoMorrows?
I don't remember 100% what my first thing was at TwoMorrows, if it was an article for back issue or if it was the Simonson Modern Masters. It was one of the two. And my first story for back issue was about the first run of Gladstone comics, the emergence of creators like Don Rosa and William Van Horn and such. I enjoyed a lot, so that was fun to write about and do research on the people. I got involved with TwoMorrows, and I may be wrong, is I was enjoying the Modern Masters books, and I had done an interview with Kelly Jones for Westfield, and had really hit it off with him. And for some reason, I reached out to TwoMorrows and said, "Hey, I'd be interested in doing this." And I'm pretty sure it was John that replied and basically said, "That's Eric's baby. You'd have to go through him." And I also got put on the back issue email list at that point for writing. Yeah, like I said, I did the Simonson Masterworks basically by, I realize now, majorly overstepping my bounds. Because I loved his work, and I met Walter and Wheezy at a convention in Chicago, and for some reason blurted out, "Hey, would you be interested in being interviewed for a Modern Masters book?" And he said he would be interested. So I came back home and emailed John again, or Eric, I don't remember which one, and basically told them, "Hey, I got Simonson to say this if you want me to do it." And I realize now how far I overstepped my bounds on that one and kind of pushed things a bit too far. But at the time, I was real excited, and they told me, "Yeah, if we can, he's someone we wanted to interview. If he's up for this, yeah, let's do it." But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to other people. I don't know how I got the gumption to do it, but that's how I ended up with that. And then I continued writing for back issue over the years and have enjoyed that a lot. Michael is a great guy to work with.
When you became associate editor,
John Morrow actually reached out to me and said, "Hey, don't tell anyone, but Michael's retiring. We've got a short list of people we're interested in," and I happen to be one of them. And I talked with John and asked him a few questions, and a lot of that he didn't really know the details of, so I needed to talk to Michael. So I had a first time I ever actually talked to Michael, and we talked for 2 hours. Thought about it after I talked with him and got back to John and said, "Hey, yeah, I'd be interested in this if you want me to do it." And thankfully they did. But it was all my years at Westfield working on the catalog, doing all that kind of stuff that I think made them think that I might know what I was doing. And since I had been working for them for a while, that I knew the material and knew the people and stuff, what it's like working for Tomorrow's. It's very good. It really is. John is very easy to talk to. When Michael was training me, he was great. The other person I work most closely with is Rich Folks, who does the design on the magazine. And he's very easy to work with. I've found the people there to be really enjoyable to work with.
so why did you choose to be editor? Why did you accept that assignment?
It's something I always wanted to do. I've always wanted to be involved in comics some way. And had the dream of someone calling me up someday and saying, "Hey, you want to write X-Men or do this or that or whatever." And someone actually did that. And I wasn't going to pass up that opportunity because I enjoy the magazine a lot. The back issue era is my main era in comics. I grew up late 70s and into the 80s. Those are, without question, my favorite comics. And it's one of those things where I would have kicked myself if I didn't try, because I figured even if I fail, I at least tried and I know. And if I didn't try, I'd wonder for the rest of my life how it would have went. So it was scary. It was a big deal to me because Back Issue is such a good magazine. Michael has done such a good job on it that I didn't want to come in there and mess things up. I wanted to make sure I did him proud.
So you're still listed, I think, as of recently as co-editor. When do you actually become editor by yourself without Michael necessarily being as a co-editor?
I want to say 159 at least, which is the Crisis issue that has started shipping and is in stores soon. Actually, I think 158 might be the first one, which was the Hey Mister issue. That was the first one with me as editor, and Michael will continue to be editor emeritus on there. So his name will always be a part of the book.
I'm glad you mentioned issue 159. That's the Crisis 40th anniversary retrospective issue. After 40 years, was it hard to come up with new things after everything that was said about Crisis?
I don't think so, because to be honest, I learned stuff reading it. John Wells wrote a piece on all the infinite Earths that were around pre-Crisis. And not having grown up a DC fan, I was familiar with a few of them, but there was a ton of stuff there that I didn't know. So I think for people reading it, they may not, if they're in the same boat as me and not have been huge DC fans or came to it a few years after or whatever, I think there's a lot there. And when people get a chance to read the stories in it, I think they will learn stuff. And there is some behind the scenes stuff. I did a short piece on comics retailing at the time and how important the direct market was to something like Crisis being able to be done. You needed every issue, and you also, to an extent, needed the fans who were really into this stuff to fully appreciate what was going on. You wanted every issue of Crisis to be able to understand the story. With newsstand distributions, that was tricky. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. And like I said, that was one that was started by Michael before I came on. So everything had been assigned before I was there. But I did the editing on the articles and sent them off to Rich for the layout. I learned stuff when I was reading the articles.
Do you plan on making any changes to the back issue, or are you just going to go like steady as it goes? Because if it ain't broke, don't try fixing it.
I think more the second one. I don't see any changes. I've thought about this, and the main change people
It's more
might
Marvel.
see. Bottom line is Michael and I are different people. And I know he was more of a DC guy. I'm more of a Marvel guy. I was very much into the independent scene in the 80s with things First and Kamiko and stuff like that. And Michael was an editor at Kamiko even. But if there's any change, I think it'll just be because we're different people and coming at it from different angles. This is one that's coming up. Next issue is 160, which is the Summer Fun issue. That was the first one where Michael asked me for some story ideas. And one of my story ideas didn't make it, but it inspired a story from him, which I would never have thought of, because my suggestion was the X-Men baseball game that happened like yearly in the X-Men titles following that. And Michael took that, and there's an article in the issue about the Marvel DC softball rivalry, which is something I wouldn't have thought of, but for Michael, that made perfect sense. And once he said that, I'm like, oh, cool, that makes sense. And I also said, I always, when I think of that period and Summer Fun, I always think of the Amazing Hero swimsuit special that ran for a number. They do that yearly. And it was initially part of the regular book. Then they spun it out into its own series. And then Marvel followed suit and stuff. And I brought that up, and Michael said, oh, hey, I hadn't thought of that. And much to my surprise, that's actually the cover feature for the issue, which has a very nice Butch Guice, Mr. Fantastic, and Invisible Woman cover. But yeah, it's just things like that where we were good at bouncing stuff off each other, but it was very clear where I'm coming from and where he's coming from are slightly different. The bottom line is we all love this era. We both love this era of comics. So I don't think people are going to see any major changes. I like the idea of the themes. It helps to focus the issue. I really like that. Yeah, I've just been operating completely under, like you said, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
One last question. You just about touched on that. One of the things that makes Back Issue unique is every issue is themed. We've got 160 issues out now of themed issues. Aren't you afraid of running out of themes, Roger?
Actually, no. That has oddly been one of my favorite parts of becoming editor is coming up with the themes. The first issue that features a theme of mine is issue 163, which is the monkeying around issue, which is all monkey and ape character features. Which when I suggested that to Michael, his response was basically, you expect the guy who wrote comics gone ape to have to say no to that idea. But I get ideas from different places. Sometimes John and I will talk and discuss some ideas and just bounce some stuff around. I think there are a lot of themes out there. One of the things that I learned from Michael is not to be too specific. I think that's, at least that's how I took it, because when I was coming up with articles for the Alien Invasions issue, which is 164, I realized at some point the back issue had never done a piece on the Kree-Skrull War. I reached out to John and asked about that because I didn't want to step on any toes, since that was one of Roy Thomas's big series, and was told, no, go ahead, that's fine. But we didn't have room for it in the Alien Invasion story, so I was trying to come up with all these different war things, since it was Kree-Skrull War and stuff, and I reached out to Michael, and I don't remember if this is exactly how he put it, but it was more, think a bit more vague, think a bit more open. It's not just a war. It could be seen as a rivalry. So that turned into our rivalry issue, where we have things like, in addition to the Kree-Skrull War, we've got Starfire from the Titans and her sister did an article on the floating poker game in Marvel. So just it, once Michael threw it open to that, it just opened the floodgates on ideas of different rivalries in comics. And that was a very good learning experience for me, because sometimes when I'm focusing too much on trying to come up with a theme, I need to broaden my view. And there have been a handful of themes that haven't gone through just because I couldn't quite come up with a way to make them work. But every story from one of those that I wanted to do has ended up in another issue with a different theme. So it's just a matter of maybe turning your head 20 degrees and looking at something just a little bit differently.
Roger Ash, editor of Back Issue, thanks very much for joining me for this podcast. It was fun having you on.
Thank you very much. It was enjoyable.